Hey, hello there. Good to see you. Hi there, fellow human. I too am a human being. My name is Jerrel Dulay, and I make video games for a living. So today I wanted to discuss a topic on how to create a video game for every single game platform. This is in regards to legacy game platforms, not necessarily modern platforms, as that's very easy. You just pick a modern game engine, and they can pretty much all cross-compile and create builds that will work on any modern platform. I'm talking about the older platforms like from the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. And this is exciting because creating homebrew games for these legacy platforms is one of my favorite things to do. It's very fulfilling and exciting to see something that you've made running on something like a Game Boy or a Nintendo DS. That's pretty exciting. So I wanted to discuss the thought process and the logistics behind all of that. So what we see on screen here to start off with is Unity. So if you want to get into game engine, this is one of the options. Depending on what you want to do with your games, what platforms you want to target, this isn't always the best answer. Every engine has its strengths and weaknesses and a number of complications that go along with it. But in general, this is one that is widely used because it can target some weaker devices, for example, low-end Android devices, for example. But there are many other options. This is not the end all and be all. It's a starting point. You can look at things like Unreal and GameMaker. So today we're actually looking at options specifically for homebrew. So I want to explain to you how I'm making a game for every platform. Right now I'm working on a project called Alone in the Cabin. It is a horror game that is kind of survive to the end of the night, a sort of a situation where creatures are trying to break into the cabin and you've got to stop them from breaking in. So the reason why I'm working on that is because I want to learn how to develop on a bunch of different platforms, and I don't have a huge amount of free time because I work on commercial titles. So I need to basically hyperbolic time chamber this kind of thing where in a very short amount of time I have to learn how to create and ship titles on older platforms, and that means that I need a project that will allow me to do that very quickly. So Alone in the Cabin is designed for me to be able to learn very quickly. So to start out with, I will discuss cross ZGB or cross ZGB if you want to say it that way. So I'm specifically using this for the Game Gear build, but this can also build for the Master System. If you have a look here on the side, you can see that Cross AGB will allow you to develop for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Analog Pocket, Mega Deck, Master System, and Sega Game Gear. So I will be using this specifically for the Game Gear, and again, I can also target the Master System as well. But that means that I have to format my graphics twice. The game, the Game Gear has a different color palette and resolution to the Master System, and those are things that you have to consider. So before we go any further, I just want to um, explain the absolute most important thing if you are going to create a multi-platform game, especially for legacy platforms, is that your project concept and your scope, it must be within your abilities. If you are a hobbyist and you're just making stuff, especially using a modern game engine, um, you have so much more help. Modern game engines do a significant amount of work for you. Modern platforms have so many less restrictions. There's so much more developmental freedom. But for legacy platforms, especially when it comes to development environments that are less assistive for you, the developer, it is absolutely important. The concept of your project and the scope, it absolutely needs to be within your ability, which means you have to have a very strong understanding of your personal ability. And secondly, this is the second most important thing when it comes to a project like this, is that the concept and the scope of the project needs to be within the capabilities of the game engine and the target platform that you are targeting. So this is why I'm designed Alone in the Cabin, is that I know that no matter what platform that I bring that game to, it should just work. The entirety of the game is pre-rendered. Um, there isn't heavy reliance on audio-visual animation and movement. So that means it gives me an opportunity to actually learn how to put a game on the console and deploy it, and I can do that in a relatively short amount of time. So let's have a look at our next game engine here. This is fantastic. This is probably the most important and the most popular legacy development engine that we've seen here. So this is what I would call a legacy game engine. And it's modern, it's well maintained, there's a ton of support. You've probably seen a ton of brand new homebrew games for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color recently, and this is created by Chris Maltby. This is fantastic, and if you want to make a Game Boy game, I absolutely recommend this. And the reason being is the user interface is extremely helpful. It is highly assistive. It does a huge amount of work for you. You have level builders in there. They've recently added, you can create your own music in there. Previously, I was using a different method. And it builds ROMs very quickly. It's fantastic. There's a huge amount of support. So I know that if I use GB Studio, I can make the Game Boy version faster and just visually better than if I were to use Cross ZGB, because Cross ZGB is fantastic, it's brilliant, but it doesn't have a visual user interface, and GB Studio has a visual user interface that will let me put my graphics in there. I can view it, and then I can color it in real time using the custom palettes of the Game Boy. So that is why I'll be using GB Studio for the Game Boy version of Alone in the Cabin. Next, we'll have a look at DS Game Maker, which is such a delight, so fantastic. This is an excellent legacy game engine. There are quite a few quirks and many flaws to this particular program. There's so many quirks, and it can get a little frustrating, but there's a good support community. There's a Discord where you can ask for assistance when things get a little confusing and you get lost. But this is an excellent game engine because it allows you to very quickly make your game with minimal resistance, as long as you understand the flaws and the quirks of using DS Game Maker. There are other options out there. If you find that you need more power, you need more reliability, then you can look at other homebrew options. But if you are just getting started out, or even if you know that your project can work very well within the constraints of DS Game Maker, absolutely go for it. This makes development extremely fast, extremely easy. You drop your PNGs into there. There's a level builder. There's a visual user interface. So this is fantastic. I strongly recommend that. For the PSP, this is such a delight. So I grew up using Game Maker as a kid, and with something called Chovy GM, as long as your game is formatted correctly, you can deploy it onto the PSP. So as you can see here, you use Game Maker 8.1. It is no longer officially distributed, but there are ways on the high seas to obtain these things. Find your treasure and use Chovy GM to deploy to the PSP, and it's so cool, man. Okay, we're going to look at 8-bit Unity. This is what I will be using to deploy my game to the Lynx. Very exciting. So I've deployed some test ROMs to the Lynx, and you can support this developer. He goes by 8-bit Dude. His name's in the Discord. I don't know if he wants to keep that private. I'll just say 8-bit Dude, I think, or whatnot. So I contribute to that monthly. I want to see this supported. I want to see it develop more. And hopefully when I start launching games using 8-bit Unity, it will bring more people in and we can build a bigger homebrew community. It has nothing to do with Unity 3D, totally different. It's called 8-bit Unity. You can also target the NES, I think Commodore 64, some other stuff that I'm not very familiar with. It says, Apple II, Atari 8-bit, but I'll mostly be using it for the Lynx. And I'll see about the NES because the color restrictions and the there's a very hard limit to the number of unique tiles you can have on the screen for visuals. So I don't know if this engine will be appropriate for the NES. Something like there's other game engines for the NES that may be appropriate for that. So I'll mostly be using this for the Lynx. We'll see. Then we'll just quickly discuss the Atari Jaguar with Jag Studio. Assembler is my weak point when it comes to development, but this allows the use of BASIC and C. So this is something that allows you to create games for the Atari Jaguar. And as you can see, every single one of these programs, you cannot just copy and paste code from one to the other. They're all quite unique. But I want to discuss an approach to my development called universalization. And that means that my code is universalized so that to an extent I actually can copy and paste a significant amount of code from one game into another. I mostly develop in C sharp, which is, I'm kind of spoiled. It's a fantastic language to develop in. I use Unity mostly, but at this point, I'm using many other SDKs and frameworks. But Unity is the main one where I create my commercial titles. And by universalizing my program, that means that I am creating my code in such a way to where I am not relying on the unique requirements of that particular engine. It means that I'm coding things in the most generic and universal way possible. And that is why I'm focusing on development environments that let me program in C-based languages, because the way you define variables, the way that you control those variables, they are generally quite universal, and especially the way that you define and call functions as well. Then we'll quickly discuss Butano GBA, which I'm currently focusing on right now. This is fantastic. This is so great. It's so powerful. It lets you create Game Boy Advance games. I will create individual videos for each of these development kits and these engines, and we can focus on one at a time, and I can share my experiences and share some advice. But you can create some gorgeous, fantastic games that run quite fluid and basically whatever you want, check out these projects. Again, look up Butano GBA if you want to make your own GBA games. Really fantastic. This one's gorgeous. Have a look at that. Okay, then we have the Joe engine in it. This is for creating Sega Saturn games. Really fantastic. This is from Johannes Fetz. This is so great. It has a built-in map editor, which is brilliant. Any development kit that comes with a map editor is already way, way, way ahead. It is leagues and leagues ahead of other development engines if you have a map editor there. Then we have Dream SDK for the Dreamcast. That's really fantastic. Again, this streamlines your development and makes building and running easily. I've recently picked up a Dreamcast and I've been learning to develop for the Dreamcast, but that one is a little bit down on the list. I have other things I was already working on first. Then we have LibDragon for the N64. This doesn't have, say for example, like the map editors and things like that. And there are so many other tools that you have to figure out. So every single one of these environments is so different. They have their own quirks, their own limitations, and some do a huge amount to help you. Say for example, 8-bit Unity, you can use Tiled, the program, to create tile maps for your games. And so you create the data in Tiled, you bring that in to 8-bit Unity, and that's how you create your. Before I discuss default, there's a couple more that I wanted to discuss. View. My keyboard fell asleep there. View engine. View Engine Studio is for creating Virtual Boy. It's a little bit complicated to set up. It's a little bit quirky, but once you have it all set up, you can make Virtual Boy games. So I will be working on that as well. And lastly, again, this is hard to find, NGPC SDK. But once you find it, let's try this. So you have the dev kit for Neo Geo Pocket, but this doesn't. I think this is missing some very important and useful examples here. No. It's tough because there's so much. The homebrew scene for Neo Geo Pocket is very small right now, and I'm hoping by launching games on Neo Geo Pocket with homebrew that we can help build that community. So I'm having a hard time finding the link. I do have it bookmarked somewhere else, so I'll share that later on. But you have to find like one website has the kit and an example on how to actually create a game and bring in functions and whatnot. So yeah, because if you look at it, certain other places, they're missing examples, and you have no idea how to use those things. Lastly, I'll quickly discuss Default. This is a great game engine. If you're used to using things like Unreal, Game Maker, Unity, you'll be right at home. This has its own quirks, though. It's very different and interesting how it does things, but it allows you to create games for multiple platforms. What I'm using it for is for developing for KaiOS, which is a lightweight mobile platform that I really like. I really like this platform. I just shipped my first little game on it. It was just a quick test to see what it takes to get through the submission and the shipping process. So I've shipped something called Dragon Glide. It's just a cute little game where you control a dragon and you glide through the sky and don't get killed and pick up dragon eggs as you do. And I created that using Default, and Default uses Lua as a programming language. As you can see here, Lua scripting. And part of the reason why I chose Default and to learn Lua is because I'm learning to develop games for the Playdate as well, and Playdate, the development environment, uses Lua. So, aside from universalizing the programming and creating my code in a way where I can just copy and paste huge chunks of it because of the universalization, what you need to do is create retargetable assets in terms of music and graphics. And what is difficult about that is that means you kind of have to start at the lowest common denominator. So I've used Milky Tracker to create music for the Game Boy, and you can then use programs to convert that into MIDI and then to bring that into a modern digital audio workspace, and then you can create modern sounding tracks out of that. So I have found more advanced and more modern tracking programs, so I'll be using those. But in terms of the graphics, I'm rendering these graphics. I create it in Unity because that's where I can work the fastest. Then I'm creating pre-rendered backgrounds using Unity. And lastly, before I move on, I'm creating graphics in high resolution and then downscaling them and then changing the palettes and repainting some of them to work, because every single platform, like for example the Game Gear, you can only have 16 colors or however the limit is. So you need to take those things into account to create high quality graphics and then downscale them from there. And lastly is plan ahead. A project like this is not something where you can easily just, I'll make it for one platform and then we'll see where we go from there. No, you're gonna cause yourself some problems. Plan ahead. You need to know exactly the platforms that you'll be working on, and so you really need to know the full product before you start developing. You need to know exactly what the scope is, exactly what your game is going to be, all of the content in it. Otherwise, you will end up in development hell and you'll get stuck. So that's all I wanted to discuss with today. I hope that you found any of this interesting, and if you wanted to make games for these platforms, go ahead and check them out. And I will create video game. Of course, I'm going to create video games. I'll create videos on each of these particular engines and more as we go on. Nest Maker, that's what I forgot to mention. So yeah, Nest Maker is an option as well, but this also creates NES games. But Nest Maker is more developed. It has more support. It's been around longer. It's got your level editors in there as well. So anyway, hope that was interesting to you. Take care of yourselves. If you would like, you can like and subscribe the video. And if you do that, if you click the like button, then there's a little number down at the bottom, which is actually your personal score. So if you click the like button, the score goes up, which means you've earned 1 point. So go ahead, get yourself a point. Click the like button, get yourself a point, and take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around.